Okay, so I seem to have gotten my tech problems figured out. So it doesn't look like there's many people on right now, but this will record and save on my channel, so I'll just get started. So, obviously with COVID-19 and everything, we're in a very unprecedented time, and everything is shifting online, which is obviously not ideal for workers, educators, the government, students, just everybody in general. And obviously we want to do the best that we can, because education is a big part of society, and we have to send the students back to school because we do want to give them that sense of stability that the world kind of doesn't have right now, but we need to give them that sense, so that since right now their minds can't comprehend exactly what is going on. But so, let me just do a quick introduction. So my name's Tuba Masood. I'm a current senior at Miami University. I'm studying computer science and bioinformatics. I have about 2 years of accessibility experience currently. I started off doing accessibility with Miami's IT department, and I continued this past summer at Quantum Health, implementing some stuff there and doing audits and some consulting. And I currently have my trusted tester certification from Homeland Security, and I'm working on 2 other certifications right now. So just a little background into why I'm hosting this webinar. A lot of my teachers throughout my K through 12 educational career had a huge impact on my life. Many of them took teaching so seriously. They became friends, they became like parents to me. I was obnoxiously close with them, and they truly thought of their students as their children. They would do anything to give them the best career, to set them up for the best future, to give them the best education possible. And staying in touch with so many of my past teachers over the years, and especially like right now, I'm seeing on social media how concerned they are about being able to have that same impact on their students now that everything is looking like it's going to be virtual or just vastly different if it is in person. So especially for younger kids, it's scary because you can't interact with your peers, you're not used to staying 6 feet away from them, you're not used to wearing face masks, and it's just a huge change in our social culture in such a short period of time that it's messing up a lot of the world and a lot of people's mental and physical health. So I'm just going to start off by talking about what disabilities are. So most people know like the very basic definition of disability. When you think of someone who's disabled, you think of someone in a wheelchair, typically. Think of someone who's blind, someone who might have a service dog, someone who might be deaf, but there are so many other types of disabilities that need to be taken into consideration. And so a disability in general is just anything that hinders how someone interacts with their environment. And even though many people might not think that they have a disability, a lot of people do. Approximately 20%, or 1 in every 5 people, have a disability. The common ones are physical impairments, so missing limbs, being wheelchair bound. Blindness is a common one. Low vision, which anybody who wears glasses, that they fall under that technically, but we wouldn't consider ourselves disabled. But technically speaking, it does hinder how you interact with your environment, because you do need additional resources in order to interact with your environment, the same as someone who has 20/20 vision. So color blindness is also a disability, since that does affect how you see the world and thus how you interact with it. lack of hearing or deafness, anxiety and depression, both also count as disabilities since they do affect your worldview and thus affect how you interact with your environment. Dyslexia and dyscalculia are big ones, the latter being essentially math dyslexia in a sense. So people who have it just tend to struggle with a lot of math-based concepts. Some of them aren't able to count backwards, some can't perform simple arithmetic computations that others might be able to very easily in their head. Autism is a very common one, and epilepsy as well. So already you're used to, in person in schools, you're used to giving tests and papers with large fonts to students. You're used to using hearing aids and mics for students who might be deaf, or having sign language interpreters in the room. You're used to students wearing glasses or seeing students in wheelchairs and crutches. But there's a lot more than just that goes into accessibility, especially in an educational setting. And it's so important in an educational setting, especially in the K-12 environment, because, at least from personal experience, feels like college educators get a lot more resources and a lot more training. And by the time you get to college anyways, most people who do have disabilities, especially academic related ones or any physical or any other type of disability, they're used to dealing with it. They understand they understand what works and what doesn't. But a kindergartner doesn't understand their dyslexia. They don't understand how to deal with it. You could say the same all the way up to high school, because at that age you still are learning exactly what works and what doesn't. You have a much broader range of knowledge than you did when you were 5, but even as a senior in high school you still don't know everything, but it is a lot easier. And so online learning, because Miami transitioned to online learning partway through spring semester, so I got to experience it. And during summers I usually take online classes anyways, and it is incredibly difficult, especially when you have no choice in it, because that just adds an additional factor. It makes you less enthusiastic about it as well. And in addition to that, having a disability and trying to learn online just is so much harder at the K through 12 level, because again, you haven't built up those coping mechanisms. You don't understand what works and what doesn't yet, because you haven't been able to experience it all. You haven't been able to learn from it. And so there's a lot that we can do in order to try to give them the same experience and have the same personal impact that you'd be able to in person with a student. So personally, for me and others that I know, which this should help K through 12 students as well, but it also might not, because again, I am a college student. I'm more used to what works in college, but I also haven't changed that much in terms of my personality and motivations from when I was in middle school or high school, so this should still work. Again, with how unprecedented the times are, we want to give them a consistent and set schedule. We want to give them some consistency in life so they have something stable. So deadlines definitely help. Working remotely for my job and for school, it does become difficult to stay on task. It becomes really difficult to manage your time properly. And so that's why deadlines end up being pretty important in that aspect, because while some students might not understand them, or they might think that they're unreasonable or that there's just too many, they do help because they give you that set in stone date. It doesn't become I will just do this when I have time or when I feel like it. It's still that this is due at this date, this is what I need to get done. So it helps keep them focused. It helps give them an end goal. And reaching out has helped. Many of my professors, when they saw some of my grades falling as we transitioned to online learning, reached out. I missed an assignment, and one of my professors reached out and asked if everything was okay, how I was holding up, if I needed an extra day to finish up the assignment. And that helped a lot, honestly. it helped my mental state, it helped my grades, it helped my motivation. And for students, it can be difficult reaching out because you don't think that you can. At least for me, that's what I thought. I thought they're trying to get used to all of this. They have so many other students to worry about. Like, I shouldn't put any of my burden on their plate. But as educators, from my experience, from all the educators that I've had in the past, all the teachers that I've been close with, they do care. And they will happily set aside time. But it ends up being the educators who do need to make that push to reach out to students. Because sometimes students, especially at earlier ages, before they reach adulthood, don't realize that they need that help, that somebody reaching out and just talking to them actually will help a significant amount. I didn't realize it. I mean, I'm an adult. I didn't realize it until my professor reached out to me and I realized what a burden it took off of my shoulders. So as adults, it falls on you to kind of look out for them in that sense as much as you can. Just as you would in person, you would reach out if a student looked down, or if it's something, or if they just looked off, if their mood was off that day, you would reach out. And that still applies, even though it is much harder to understand or realize when you need to. It's still a good idea to have a consistent, like, reaching out to them every week, touching in, and doing like one-on-ones with students every other week. And just reach out as much as you can. In terms of actual educational material, additional web resources are going to be very beneficial for them, because obviously in person you can ask the teacher for more help, you can ask them for more examples, but you can't always do that in an online format. And so providing websites or books that they can read or videos that they can watch that can help build upon their knowledge and build a better foundation for it, just make their knowledge more solid, will help an obnoxious amount. And I mean, they're going to be on their computers anyways, their computers, tablets, phones, whatever, since they're online learning. And so if they can just do a click to another tab just to read more while they're doing an assignment, that's going to help a significant amount. Because if they're looking for stuff, they might not find the right information, they might get easily distracted by something else or different links. So it just helps and give them that set material of, here is an all-encompassing set of information about what you need and what you can learn. So what in addition can you do to help implement accessibility and make it easier for your students who do have disabilities and students overall? Some of the big things are visual things. So you're going to want to make sure that all of your text has sufficient color contrast. Typically, most like worksheets and documents are going to be black text on white, but I've had teachers before who like to spice it up just to make it more fun and add colors in. And while that's always wonderful, it definitely does help. But you still want to make sure that any of your students who are hard of vision, or low vision, or colorblind can still see it. Because if they can't see it, that just gives them a disadvantage to their peers. They get less out of the lesson than if obviously they could see it. So if you just look up the web aim contrast checker, you can plug in colors there and it will tell you the contrast ratios, and you want it to be at least 4.5 to 1. Another thing is having larger font sizes. Many educators are already used to doing this for certain students who are low vision, but this will help overall because obviously students are going to be staring at their screens all day. I mean, I work in IT, I'm a computer science major, I literally live on my computer, and so my eyes do hurt. Small text starts hurting my eyes after a long period of time, and I genuinely cannot read it by the end of the day. So your students are going to be staring at their screens all day for classes and then all day for homework. Just make the font sizes a bit larger, because that will help so much with their strain, and if their eyes aren't strained, if their eyes aren't tired, then they're able to continue learning. Another thing relating to text and fonts is use sans serif fonts. So serif fonts are like Times New Roman, anything that have little bars at the bottom. So like the letter N's that have the straight lines at the bottom, things like that. Sans serif is what I currently have in my body, right here. And serif is the title, so it has the little bars at the bottom. Sans serif doesn't. Sans serif fonts help simplify the text and help separate out the letters more so they don't blend together in a sense, which again helps when your eyes are really tired, when you've been staring at screens all day and everything starts to blur together a bit, and it's just a lot easier on the eyes in terms of a design perspective. Another part would be space text out. Keep white space on the page. Break apart long paragraphs. Again, it just makes it easier after a super long day, and it makes it easier to understand, because obviously in person, a lot of the times, if there's a long paragraph with instructions or something else, the teacher is going to be reading it out in many cases. But with online learning, that's not always the case. Students often have to read it themselves, and that they can lose their place. It gets very overwhelming when there's a bunch of text bunched together into a very small space and it's not broken apart, because it can become very difficult for students to know when in a paragraph they need to take a break so that they still comprehend it properly. Another thing that I know, like AP and honors teachers and just advanced classes in general don't want to do, but it is better, use simple terms. Obviously, again, in person, students can ask you what something means, they can ask for more clarification, but it's not always that simple with online learning. And so you want to make it as simple for them as possible, because you do want them to have a sense of independence and self-sufficiency in terms of their learning, and they want to be able to understand it no matter what time they're looking back at. Even if they start an assignment late or they start in the middle of the night, they want to be able to understand what they're doing, because that understanding relieves that feeling of helplessness that can come with an assignment, and that just helps them learn even more, because then they'll actually want to do the assignment. Well, they'll feel less discouragement from doing the assignment because they do understand it, and so it's more bearable. It's an easier thing to tackle. It's been a very long time since I think this has been done, but I still remember middle school and early high school. Some of my teachers had blogs that they kind of had that had assignments and information and stuff. I think it was mainly my science classes, but I don't know if any teachers still use those. But I know a lot of people are using Google Classroom nowadays. I don't know how much customization you can do on that, but if you can on both of those areas, keep the menus to the left side of the page, because that's what students want to encounter first. They need to be able to navigate to what they need. They don't want to be going through everything on a page to find what they need, especially if they use screen readers or keyboard navigation. They don't want to be running through a bunch of elements and taking up more of their time than need be just to find a simple page. In addition to that, make sure it has a logical order. So the menu should go in order, typically chronological, but that can also differ. I don't know many cases where it would, unless it's being used as more of a reference for different past assignments or different strategies, but typically it would be chronological, so make sure it's in a logical order. And same with worksheets, any papers that you hand out, make sure that they're in a logical order. Things should flow easily, because the biggest rule is that you should be able to understand anything without context. So if you give a student a random paragraph, they should be able to understand that paragraph without any additional, or a link. If you give a student a link, a hyperlink to a site, they should be able to understand what that site is. So it shouldn't say click here, it should say biography of George Washington, because they want to know exactly what it is. It will help simplify their time, especially when they're going back through notes. when you give them worksheets and information packets and it has pictures, make sure that they have captions, because you want that supplemental knowledge for them to know what is happening in it. Because obviously, again, you're not there to explain it to them. It can be a lot more difficult to look at it on a screen than it will be to look at it on a paper, because it definitely is different formats, and just there's a lot that changes between the two. In terms of formatting classes and worksheets, again, use clear and consistent layouts for presenting the content, because you don't want their eyes to jump around. You don't want them to get confused about what is happening or where they are or where information is, because that just makes it more difficult. Again, that makes them lose motivation, and they don't want to complete the assignment because they don't know what's happening. And some more stuff that you can do for any documents that you're creating, any lesson plans that you're going to be sending out to them, any worksheets, use headings, because that helps break apart the page. Again, it helps their eyes jump to where it needs to go, because they can understand the big ideas, and also from that they can understand what it's about. They see the headings and they can know what to expect from that specific section, the page, etc. And it just helps overall, and especially for studying, that helps a lot, because it's a lot easier to break it out by sections when you have an over-encompassing idea, rather than when you have to dig for that specific idea, and then you waste so much more time, and you might end up with a wrong idea, and there's just a hot mess that can happen from it. So again, like I said before, use descriptive wording for hyperlinks. Avoid creating PDFs. Don't make PDFs your main form of documentation. Use them as supplemental documents, but if you're going to be sending out documents to students, send them as words, HTML files, Word files, Google Docs, because a lot of times PDFs are not very easily readable by screen readers, because if it's not done right, there's a lot of customization that has to go into it to make it truly accessible, such as adding physically and manually adding in headers, breaking apart sections, labeling things. So just avoid PDFs. Do as many Word documents, Google Docs, HTML files as you can. When you're searching out supplemental information, look for videos that have captions that are as accurate as possible, or that have audio transcripts. Like National Geographic, Think the History Channel, a lot of big educational sites will have audio transcripts at a minimum with their videos. So always seek that out, because in addition to students who are deaf, it helps so many other students, because some students can't do well just listening to something. They need to be able to read it. Some students need text in addition to the audio and video. You just want to, you don't want to make any assumptions about how they can learn. You also want to actively search for accessible sites. So you can probably find a list online of educational sites that are accessible, since obviously everything's moving online nowadays. Digital accessibility is becoming a much bigger thing in the recent past, because everything is moving online. And so in order to check if a site's accessible for very, very accessibility, just tab through it. Make sure you can see an outline on every element, make sure you can reach every element, make sure you can interact with every element using the arrow keys, the space key, or the enter key. Make sure that you can reach every element, because I know for me personally, I am able to use a mouse, but a lot of the time, since I'm typing away on my computer anyways, I just tab through a page. I use keyboard navigation, since it's easier than reaching over to my mouse, clicking something, and then going back again, positioning my hand how it was, etc. Hopping onto that, don't make assumptions about students at all. And obviously that's a given, but it's probably not a given in the sense that I mean. So obviously the younger generations, the millennials, are used to technology. Gen Z grew up on technology. You want to make assumptions with that, however, because some people are more competent with certain technologies than other people are. For example, some of my peers, obviously I'm a computer science major, so I can interact easier with a lot of different software. I can learn it much quicker. I can understand it better than a lot of my peers can, even though we're the same age. We grew up with technology in the same ways. So you don't want to make any assumptions about how easy it is to learn new technology for a student or their ability to use it and understand it. Even if it isn't like Zoom, if it's any site or technology that you send to them to supplement their education, you don't want to make any assumptions. And so that ties into the next point. If you want to provide multiple ways for them to learn and multiple ways for them to demonstrate their learning. This has become a much more popular idea and theme within education in recent years, because obviously every student learns differently, and if you're just catering to one type of learning, so like you just lecture all the time, you're going to leave behind so many students. So many students won't understand what's going on. They won't be learning it as effectively as some of their peers, because that's not how they learn. Some people are visual learners, some people prefer hearing it, some people prefer seeing it, some people prefer doing it themselves, some prefer seeing other people do it. There's such a wide variety of learners, and you need to try to accommodate for as many of those as possible. So for every assignment, every lesson, try to have as many different ways to learn it as possible. So have a written information sheet, find a video that explains the information or access supplemental information, find images and diagrams that help explain it. And in addition, especially for like projects, keep them open-ended. You can give like categories, so like create a PowerPoint, create a quiz, etc. But you want to give them as many different ways to demonstrate their learning as possible. Because obviously some people are more straight to the point, i.e. make a quiz to show your knowledge on this. Some people are a lot more visual, so they would want to make a poster or a PowerPoint. Some people might want to make a video. You just need to let them be creative, because it is one of those places where it's going to be difficult at first, because obviously they're not going to understand exactly what works and what doesn't for them in many situations, especially the younger kids. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a lot more beneficial because it will be what works for them, rather than a very broad, this kind of has to work for everybody in one way or another. It will be very specific to them, and if they have that freedom of choice, that's going to help build that foundation for that knowledge in their brain. It's going to help them learn it better because they got to learn it themselves how they needed to. Another thing to avoid that I touched on a bit earlier is avoid acronyms, avoid overly complex words. Again, don't make assumptions, because some people know what PDF stands for, some people know what HTML stands for, some people know what ASAP stands for, some people don't. Like, you can't make any assumptions that somebody knows an acronym or an abbreviation. If you're going to have overly complex words, do what a lot of textbooks do and have like a column out to the side that defines them, because again, it is a very difficult time. Online learning is difficult as is, and not being able to understand what is happening or what information you're trying to take in just makes it so much more difficult. Again, use varying examples and assignments to engage all the different types of learners. So again, videos, pictures, like TED Talks, written out assignments, PowerPoints. Use as many different types as you can. Creating outlines is also helpful for students, especially when studying for exams. It doesn't have to be the most in-depth thing. It could easily just be, here are the general topics we covered. So like a decade in history and some big events or big people, and they can easily go in themselves and fill out more information about each of those, but it gives them a starting point. It makes them feel like they're not floating free and floundering on their own to figure out what they need and don't need. Another thing is to give them enough time. That ties back into one of the disabilities that many people don't consider to be a disability, and that's anxiety. Because a lot of students do get very anxious when giving exams because just how our educational system is set up. Exams are a big deal, and they're made out to be a big deal, and it makes students very anxious because they do somewhat determine your future in terms of if you pass the class, if you move on to the next grade, if you go to college, if you get a degree. And so ensuring that students have enough time is always going to be beneficial. I know, at least in college, I'm not sure if it was this way in my K through 12 education, but some students do have it on file and they are able to get extended time for exams, so like double time, time and a half. So talk to your students, find out what they need. Obviously, there's going to be some students who are going to try to take advantage of it, but having the few, but then having everybody else who benefit is better than not letting the students who do need it benefit from it just out of fear. And that's mainly all I have. There's so many different situations. There's so many different softwares and websites and programs that districts are using. And there's a lot. It's very hard to figure out exactly what can be done with all. The best thing you can honestly do is reach out to your district, reach out to central office, reach out to the IT department, and ask them to ensure that any products that they do bring in, any software to help supplement learning, is as accessible as possible. Because a lot of it is out of educators' hands in terms of the actual software itself. That's on developers. But as much as I hate to say it, there isn't a lot you can do in terms of software rather than try to find the most accessible one. But there are small things that you can do, like I mentioned, all the things that I mentioned in this. And although it might feel small, it might feel like it's not making a difference, even the tiniest difference is enough, because you want your students to benefit as much as possible. And even if they're only benefiting what might seem like a tiny amount, that's still better than nothing. And so obviously, I don't know what everybody's using. I don't know what approaches each district is taking or each school. I don't know how each educator is approaching it, but I do want to help as much as possible. But obviously I don't have all the free time in the world because of school and work and just life. But if you do want to reach out to me, if you do want some advice, if you do want some quick feedback, feel free. This is my email, tuba.masood634@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out, because I will happily answer as many questions as I can, because I do want the students right now who are still in school to have the best education that they can, because obviously it won't be the same as it would be in person, but it doesn't mean that it can't be good. And I want them to still have those good, positive, impactful relationships with their teachers, and that starts with knowing that their teachers truly do care about them and their education, and I would love to help in that. So thank you for attending, and again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.